guys. Tonight we're creeping through crooked alleys and candlelit cottages where the whispers carry heavier than the church bells and secrets leak like ale from a cracked barrel. Someone's been unfaithful. And you? You just happen to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hands still warm, heart still racing. A rooster crows somewhere far too early. Or maybe it's just your conscience. The floor beneath your boots is packed mud, a little slick from the night's drizzle, and your tunic clings unpleasantly to your back. That window behind you? Yeah, someone's definitely peeking. Word will spread faster than fleas in a hayloft. You fumble with your belt. It's too late. You cheated, and the Middle Ages has no mercy. Just neighbors with pitchforks and moral superiority. So, before we continue the story, give me just 1 minute. Tomorrow the battle will be long, so rest a little at our bonfire. Let everything slip from your mind, take a deep breath, and relax every part of your body. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? What time is it for you right now? Let's see how far this little medieval tale can travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle quickly past the thatch-roofed homes, trying not to think about the baker's wife who saw you, or the smithy's apprentice who definitely saw you. You know how this works. Gossip in this town moves faster than the rats in the granary. And unlike now, where a cheating scandal might just end in a passive-aggressive Instagram post, here it ends with something far more permanent. You remember what happened last time someone strayed? A miller's daughter, wasn't it? She'd slipped away too many times under the moonlight, and her father had found her, dragged her back by the hair. The entire village watched as she was locked in the cellar for a week, with only black bread and church songs sung through the floorboards. And that was the lenient response. See, cheating in the Middle Ages isn't just a betrayal of love. It's treason against the divine. Marriage wasn't merely a romantic agreement. It was a sacrament, a social contract, and sometimes a property deal. Violating that meant you didn't just offend your spouse, you offended God, your Lord, your town, your goat, and possibly the Pope. And you? Well, you've just joined that not-so-exclusive club of cheaters. Congratulations. Your prize? A front-row seat to medieval justice, complete with public shaming, bizarre punishments, and the occasional ducking stool. You duck into a side alley, heart thumping, nose filled with the scent of old onions and horses. Someone snoring behind a crate. Another shape stirs by the well. You're not safe, not from the law, not from the church, and certainly not from gossip. Your boots squish as you step in something unpleasant. Ah, yes, the joys of night travel. Behind you, a door creaks open. A lantern flickers to life. A voice calls out your name. Your real name. The one you were hoping nobody would remember tonight. You freeze. The game is up. There's no police force here, no handy go talk to HR form. Justice will come in the form of a village meeting, a suspiciously well-used wooden post in the square, and an audience ready to jeer. They might not even care who was right or wrong, just that they get a good show. And here's the kicker. People didn't even agree on what cheating was. Was a lingering look a sin? A shared ale cup? A love letter folded in a rush? Historians still argue whether emotional infidelity held the same weight back then, but in practice, most villagers judged by their own gut and their jealousy. The lantern draws closer. You step backward, bump into a bucket, and it topples with a loud clang. A dog starts barking somewhere down the lane. A baby cries. You wince. You're not just caught, you're known. In this century, cheating might lead to a breakup text or an awkward silence. But here, you might get dragged into the square by dawn, tied to a post, and have vegetables thrown at your head by people whose names you forgot, but who never forgot that time you stole their turnip. Someone grabs your shoulder. You spin around, breath caught in your throat. But it's just old Merrick, drunk again. He blinks at you, eyes swimming, and grunts. Go home, lad. You stink of secrets. He's right. And as you slip through the night, you realize your story is only just beginning. The punishment hasn't arrived yet, but the Middle Ages always collects what it's owed. The morning sun rises with no sympathy. Its golden light spills over the village like judgment itself. And you're standing in the stocks, wooden beams clamped tightly around your wrists and neck, with a faint itch crawling up your nose. You can't reach it, of course. That would be too merciful. The square is already bustling, and not just because it's market day. You're the entertainment now. Chickens cluck indifferently at your feet, and a child giggles as he lobs a soft tomato in your general direction. It misses, barely. You try to shift your weight, but the position is just awkward enough to make that a mistake. Your back pinches, your pride shrivels. Welcome to the medieval version of social media, except instead of getting canceled online, you get cabbaged in public. The stocks, or pillory, depending on your zip code of the 14th century, were a favorite for all sorts of offenses. Drunkenness, gossip, swindling, and yes, cheating. Even if the church called it adultery and the local court called it breach of honor, the punishment was often the same. Put them on display and let the town decide how shamed you should feel. Now don't misunderstand, it's not always so physical. Sometimes the worst part is the silence. The way the baker walks past without a glance. The smithy's wife who used to sell you honeycomb turns her back like you're a pile of spoiled meat. Shame here doesn't just cling, it ferments. And yet the village loves a good scandal. The miller's boy is betting how long you'll last before fainting. A gaggle of old women perch on stools nearby, muttering like a Greek chorus with strong opinions and sharper tongues. One of them hisses, "I heard he dallied with the widow behind the chapel." No, another replies. It was the brewer's wife. She wears perfume, obvious. Both, says a third. You can see it in his hair. Sin leaves a shine. You're starting to wish they'd throw another tomato. At least that's over quick. Interestingly, historians still argue about how common these public punishments really were. Were the stocks used every week, or were they more symbolic? Just used often enough to remind people, don't mess up. Records are patchy, but we do know they were effective. People remembered shame, and unlike prison, which was rare and mostly for debts, the stocks were designed to be short, sharp, and socially searing. You don't just serve a sentence, you become a cautionary tale. The funny part? Cheating wasn't always treated equally. If you were wealthy, noble, or even just charming enough, you might avoid the stocks entirely. a whispered apology to the right priest, a donation to the church roof fund, and voila, cleansed by coin. But you didn't have the right friends, or the right accent, or the right haircut. Let's be honest, your haircut probably didn't help. You spot your spouse in the crowd. Their face is unreadable. That's worse than anger, worse than tears. They just turn away, their cloak flapping behind them, like the last page of a book you don't get to finish. And here's another wrinkle. If the person you cheated with was unmarried, they might walk away free. The logic being, you were the one who broke a vow. They just participated. Unless, of course, they were from the wrong family, or had enemies, or were pregnant. Then suddenly the town found moral outrage like it grew on trees. One odd case from the 13th century tells of a man punished by being paraded through town wearing his lover's dress. It was meant to humiliate, confuse, and teach a lesson. Don't stray, or you'll strut unwillingly through the square in lace and ridicule. But don't worry, your sentence is almost over. Just a few more hours. Maybe a nap if the neck cramps don't mind. You close your eyes and try to ignore the squelch of something damp hitting the post beside your ear. A blessing in disguise. It didn't hit your face. That's progress, right? A chicken pecks at your boot. You feel smaller than it. That feels right. Eventually the bailiff saunters over. He always looks smug, possibly because he never ends up in the stocks himself. He checks the sun, scratches something in a little notebook, then shouts, "Release him." And just like that, the wooden yoke creaks open. Your arms are numb, your legs wobble, your pride's somewhere in the mud beneath the stocks. But you're free, sort of, because the real punishment, it doesn't end here. It follows you back home. It lives in glances, in muttered jokes at the tavern, in the way your neighbors let their dogs bark a little longer at your door. Cheating in the Middle Ages was never just a mistake. It was a performance. One you starred in, whether you liked it or not. And your encore? That's coming next. Your wrists are still sore from the stocks, the wood having bitten in just enough to leave angry half-moon dents. As you rub them, trying not to flinch too obviously, a voice calls your name again, but not with the same venom as last night. This time it's the Reeve, and he's holding a roll of parchment. That's never a good sign. You're summoned for an ordeal? No, not like a talk with your in-laws or having to eat your neighbor's questionable stew. A real ordeal. Medieval justice has many flavors, but this one's especially spicy. You trudge behind the Reeve as he leads you through the village toward the church. The villagers part as you pass, some crossing themselves, others just trying to catch a better look. You overhear someone mutter, "Hope it's the boiling iron." That's a favorite. Delightful. Here's the deal. In places and times where evidence was scarce and objectivity scarcer, guilt was determined by ordeal. That meant letting God sort it out. If you were innocent, divine power would save you. If not, well, you probably wouldn't survive long enough to argue. There were a few standard options. You might undergo ordeal by hot iron, where you'd carry a red-hot bar of iron across several paces. Then your burned hands would be bandaged, and after 3 days, a priest would inspect the wounds. If they were healing well, you were innocent. If not surprise, you're guilty. Or maybe you'd be dunked in a pond. Ordeal by cold water. Here's the logic. Since water was pure and holy, it would reject the guilty. So if you floated, you were condemned. If you sank, congratulations, you were innocent and unconscious. Yes, this system had flaws. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were truly meant to test guilt or whether they were theatrical methods for community control. Some suggest the church quietly rigged the outcomes, guiding results based on rumor, politics, or who owed whom a goat. You arrive at the church. It's dark and smells like incense and damp wool. A young priest meets you in the vestibule. He's got ink on his fingertips and that particular expression monks often wear, somewhere between pity and superiority. He mutters a prayer. Then, with surprising cheerfulness, explains that today's ordeal is a trial by iron. Of course it is. You're taken to a side chapel. There's a brazier heating something that definitely shouldn't glow. A deacon stands nearby, fanning it with a solemn rhythm. The bar itself is about the length of your forearm, and it hisses as the flames lick at its edges. A few villagers are let in to watch. Of course. Can't have divine judgment without a peanut gallery. You're told to carry the bar across 3 paces marked on the stone floor. Simple enough, unless you like your skin attached. You nod once. The priest offers another prayer, this one longer. You briefly consider running, but the door's blocked by the reeve, and you doubt your legs could outrun shame anyway. Then they hand you the iron. You grit your teeth. It burns. You walk the steps. You want to scream, but don't give them the satisfaction. You drop the iron on a wooden board. Done. Then they bandage your hands in linen and whisper a few more prayers. You're let out, dizzy and clammy. Now the waiting begins. 3 days later, the village gathers again. Your hands are unwrapped. Everyone leans in. The priest nods solemnly, healing poorly. Someone in the crowd gasps. Another mutters, "He always seemed like the type." You've been judged. Interestingly, ordeal by hot iron actually declined after the 13th century, when Pope Innocent III, clearly tired of his name being attached to such nonsense, banned clergy from participating. Without priests, most of these rituals lost their official stamp. But here in your sleepy village, the old ways linger. Oh, and the cheese wheel? Yes, that was real too. Ordeal by blessed bread and cheese. You'd be forced to eat a consecrated bite, and if you choked or convulsed, it meant you were guilty. Ridiculous, sure, but not as ridiculous as floating equals evil. Back in your hut, hands throbbing, you try to sleep, but dreams come strange, twisted by fire and judgment. You dream of bread that bites back, of ponds that reach up and yank you down. You dream of villagers with fish eyes whispering through mouths full of smoke. You awake sweating, hand bandages soaked. You're branded now, not by iron, but by memory. And tomorrow, they say you'll face the Lord of the Manor. You might miss the stocks after all. You wake up with your hands throbbing, bandages stiff with dried salve and regret. The scent of burnt flesh lingers on your fingers, though perhaps that's just in your mind. You roll over, half expecting to be alone, but no, the village has sent a messenger. A young boy, barefoot and nervous, holds out a folded scrap of parchment. You're summoned, he squeaks, to the monastery. They're recording it. Fantastic, just what your soul needs, a trip to the scribes. You trudge up the winding path toward the stone abbey at the edge of the woods. The bell tolls once, deep and slow, as if the building itself is sighing at your life choices. Ivy clings to the ancient stone walls like judgment, and inside the cool hush wraps around you like a shroud. The monk at the door nods solemnly. He doesn't ask your name, he already knows. You're led into the scriptorium, a long hall of flickering candles, hunched shoulders, and the gentle scratch of quills on parchment. The air smells like ink, beeswax, and quiet disapproval. A senior monk gestures for you to sit at a small wooden bench, where he opens a heavy ledger with a sigh that might be older than the building itself. This isn't just a punishment. It's record keeping. Because in the medieval world, sin wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was documented and not just scribbled down. Inked in Latin in precise strokes, meant to last for centuries. Somewhere, someday, a scholar might read this entry and raise an eyebrow at your marital misadventures. The monk dips his quill and begins. He writes your name, your spouse's name, the alleged incident, the punishment already given, and then asks you in a dry tone if you wish to confess anything further. You think about it. The boiled hands, the cabbage, the shame. You shake your head slowly. No more surprises. But the monk isn't finished. He's curious. Was it lust? He asks, like he's inquiring about your favorite hymn. Or pride. You hesitate. Loneliness, you say at last. He pauses, doesn't write it down. Maybe he's heard that one before. You glance around at the stacks of records. Historians still argue over how reliable these confessionals were. Some monks were meticulous, writing down every sinful syllable. Others took liberties, spiced up the tales, added poetic endings. One 14th century entry accused a woman of turning into a wolf after adultery, though that likely says more about the monk's imagination than reality. The monks didn't just record your sins for fun, they were building a moral map of the world, one cheater at a time. And once your story was inked, it became part of that map. Your name might end up on a list sent to the bishop, or worse, read aloud during a sermon as a lesson. You're led to a small chapel afterward for reflection. A statue of St. Jerome stares down at you with stony disappointment. You sit, letting the candlelight flicker across the stone floor, thinking about how a single act, one moment of heat or heartbreak, can echo so loudly in this world. A novice monk appears and offers you a strange parchment. It's a prayer for penance, written in poetic Old French. He says you should recite it at dawn for 7 days. You look it over. It's creative. It rhymes temptation with condemnation in a way that's almost impressive. And while the church may forgive you, eventually the record never fades. These ledgers are designed to endure longer than memory. They are, in their way, the medieval version of a permanent record. You glance once more at the thick book. Somewhere near the middle, your story is now nestled between a shepherd who stole a relic and a nun who supposedly talked in her sleep about a handsome angel. You feel weirdly honored. Then again, maybe not. As you walk out, you spot the abbot in his garden, plucking weeds with deliberate care. He nods at you, doesn't speak, just looks at your bandaged hands, then up at the sky, as if checking for thunderclouds. It's a sunny day, he sighs anyway. You're summoned again. This time it's not the church calling you, nor the priest with his ink-stained robes and soft penance rhymes. It's the manor court, the secular authority, the lord of the land, which means no prayers, no psalms, just peasants, jurors, and a bailiff with suspiciously clean fingernails. The manor court meets in the great hall, a timber-beamed room that smells like old ale, damp wood, and too many unwashed tunics. A few dogs wander freely underfoot. The walls are hung with faded tapestries that probably looked grand once but now sag like overcooked bread. You stand at the edge of the hall waiting your turn as the steward reads out loud the cases for the day. Most of them are minor, boundary disputes, grain theft, a man accused of letting his pigs wander too freely. Apparently the pigs made it all the way to the bishop's garden. There'll be legends. Then it's your name. The bailiff calls you forward, loud and bored, like a man ordering turnips. You step into the center of the hall, all eyes turning toward you with that same blend of curiosity and delight they might reserve for a juggling bear. Today's trial isn't about sin, it's about property, honor, and disruption. Because in the eyes of the manor, cheating isn't just a personal failure, it's a communal inconvenience. Affairs lead to fights, fights lead to broken fences, and broken fences lead to lawsuits. It's a slippery slope. They call your spouse to speak, and their testimony is sharp as a butcher's knife. Not cruel, just devastatingly precise. Who you were with, when, what was overheard. The jury of local peasants hums with barely contained drama hunger. Someone leans in and whispers, "He's done for." Interestingly, manor courts could issue punishments for cheating, especially if it led to brawls or breach of the peace. And the punishments varied wildly depending on the lord, the mood of the village, and how much beer had been served. Fines were common. Forced reconciliation was another. Sometimes the offending party was made to parade through town in a ridiculous outfit. Once in Yorkshire, a man was made to wear a sheep's skull tied to his belt for a month. Not exactly subtle. You brace yourself. The steward announces the charge. Adulterous conduct to the disorder of the peace and dishonoring of the wife. A low murmur stirs the court. Your defense? Well, you don't really have one. What are you going to say? It was an accident? She smelled like rosemary and I tripped into her arms? But here's the strange part. The court doesn't seem that angry. They seem entertained, as if they've seen this exact performance a dozen times before. And perhaps they have. Cheating, after all, was more common than the sermons like to admit. People got married young, often for land or status. Love was optional. Temptation was constant. What did they think was going to happen? Historians still argue whether manor courts took adultery seriously or treated it more like a nuisance than a crime. In some regions, punishments were symbolic, designed to embarrass but not ruin. In others, they were harsh enough to make you rethink every flirtation for the rest of your life. The steward raises a hand for silence. A fine. It could have been worse. You nod, muttering a, "Yes, my lord." Your voice cracks slightly, but just as you're about to retreat, the steward clears his throat. And by request of the injured party. A day in the public square, seated backwards on a mule, wearing a cap of nettles. Ah, there it is. The crowd roars with laughter. Even the dogs look amused. You're escorted out, trying not to trip over your own feet or sense of dignity. Outside, the mule is waiting. It looks like it hasn't been brushed since the last plague. The cap of nettles is, indeed, a crown of fresh stinginess, and it burns the moment they shove it onto your head.
And riding backward, it's worse than it sounds.
Children chase after you. Women throw wilted herbs. A man with no teeth sings a crude song about love gone sour and pants that wouldn't stay on, and you, bouncing backwards through the village, wonder if any of this will ever be forgotten. Spoiler, it won't. The story will grow in retelling. You'll become the punchline of ballads and the cautionary tale told to starry-eyed apprentices who dream of stolen kisses behind the pigsty. You just hope they leave out the part about the mule. It begins on Sunday. The bell tolls low and long over the fields. You shuffle into the stone chapel, trying to keep your head down. No luck. The pews creak with shifting weight as villagers lean to get a better look. You're not just a parishioner anymore. You're Exhibit A in today's sermon. The priest climbs into the pulpit, his robes a bit too clean, his eyes a bit too bright. He clears his throat. Brethren, he begins, the wages of sin are many, and some of them walk among us today. Wonderful. You glance at the door. Too far. And besides, fleeing would just confirm things. The sermon goes on. Lust, temptation, the devil's whispers in the night. It's a full greatest hits album of medieval spiritual guilt. You stare at the floor, tracing a crack in the flagstone. Someone coughs. A baby burps. Your stomach growls loudly. Perfect timing. Then he says it. And as St. Paul reminds us, no adulterer shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. Someone in the back gasps. You could swear the altar candles flicker harder. After the service, the priest finds you in the vestibule. He doesn't shout or scold. He simply hands you a wooden token, carved with a cross and a thorn. You are to do penance, he says, and public contrition.
Ah, yes, penance. The medieval church's all-purpose spiritual stain remover.
This time it's not fire or nettles. It's prayer. Lots of it. You're assigned 7 dawn masses in a row. You must kneel the whole time, no breakfast beforehand. The priest gives you a parchment of pre-approved sins to confess, just in case you forgot any. Spoiler, you didn't. You're also tasked with walking barefoot to the next village, delivering a message to a monk you've never met. That's 20 miles over stone paths and cow droppings in the name of cleansing your soul. Historians still argue how much of this penance was spiritual and how much was performative. In theory, it was about reconciliation with God. But in practice, it was very much about letting everyone see that you knew you'd messed up. A kind of holy walk of shame with more blisters and fewer tomatoes. Still, there were perks. Some sinners got indulgences, a kind of divine coupon. Do the right rituals, say the right prayers, and you might shave off a few years in purgatory. It was also possible to upgrade your penance, donate land to a monastery, fund a church roof, or if you were rich enough, commission a stained glass window. You don't have stained glass money. You barely have shoe money. So you take the hard road, literally, dusty, aching, sun-blistered. You pass a shrine on the roadside and pause to rest. A wooden carving of St. Mary stares down, serene and mildly judgmental. You mumble a prayer. She doesn't blink. At the next village, the monk takes the letter, nods politely, and offers you some barley porridge. You eat in silence, grateful and sore. He doesn't ask about your penance, just offers balm for your feet and a bed of straw for the night. It's the softest thing you've laid on since before this mess began. Back home, you're greeted with silence. Not cruel, just cold. Your spouse has nothing to say. They pass you a bowl of broth without looking up. You eat it slowly, the wooden spoon clinking in rhythm with the crackle of the hearth. And somewhere in the corner, tucked behind a pewter jug, lies the church's little token, still warm from the sun, still etched with thorns. You carry it to bed like a stone in your pocket. You don't sleep well that night. The chapel bells ring in your dreams, distant and echoing. The priest's voice fades into wind, and you wake with the sense that someone's watching, even if it's just your own conscience, wearing a cassock and scowl. The church has forgiven you, or at least started the paperwork, but forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And next week, there's a feast day. The whole town will be there. You'll have to stand beside them, toast with them, pretend you don't see the way their eyes flick toward you and then quickly away. You've served your penance, but the whispers still come. You think the worst is behind you until dinner. It starts simply enough. A quiet evening, a loaf of rye bread, some lentils, and a turnip stew simmering over the hearth. Your spouse moves with the calm precision of someone who's done this 1,000 times, but tonight, there's something different. They place a steaming bowl before you with practiced care, a spoon, a crust of bread on the side. No words, not even a glance. You take a bite. It's fine, maybe a little bland. You reach for the bread, and suddenly you remember. This is the bread they were kneading yesterday. The dough was thumped with such fury, it echoed through the walls. The cat fled. The dog whimpered. The table trembled. That bread carries a message. You look down. The crust is cracked. The center is dense. It tastes like regret and retribution. In the Middle Ages, there were no talk shows, no couples therapy, no, let's sit down and talk this through. There was bread, and sometimes bitter bread meant bitter truths. Passive-aggressive culinary gestures were just one of the many creative ways spouses responded to betrayal. Some threw things. Some left. Some made sure your meals tasted like soap. One documented case tells of a woman who buried her husband's shoes in the pig pen after he strayed, so his feet would always stink of shame. You're not quite sure what your spouse has done to this stew, but you're tasting something metallic. You push the bowl away slowly. Maybe just nerves. Maybe guilt, maybe turnips gone, mildly vengeful, but the silence across the table is louder than any slap. That night you sleep in the stable. You don't argue, you don't ask. You just take the blanket, the straw, and the goat's curious sniff as penance. In the dim moonlight, curled up next to a bale of hay, You hear soft footsteps outside the barn. Someone's up late. Maybe your spouse, maybe a neighbor, maybe both. You lie still, not wanting to know. See, while public punishment was the norm for cheaters, private retribution was just as medieval and far less predictable. Jealousy was no small thing. In a world where marriages were often arranged and love grew like moss, slow and uncertain, betrayal could cut deep. And since legal divorce was rare, vengeance filled the gap. Some women brewed cooling drafts, infusions of herbs to suppress their husbands' affections. Others took bolder routes. A 14th century tale speaks of a wife who sewed her husband's breeches shut while he slept. Another reportedly trained her geese to attack anyone who lingered too long near her garden gate. Medieval problems, medieval solutions. Historians still argue whether such stories were fact or folklore, warnings to wandering hearts or celebrations of clever wives. But they reflect a very real truth. Cheating wasn't just punished by law. It was punished at home. And for men, retaliation could be just as dramatic. If a wife was caught straying, her husband might shave her head, confiscate her dowry, or lock her in the house for days. In some towns, the punishment was riding the stang, a public mockery parade featuring a wooden pole and crude songs about infidelity. You didn't have to be guilty, just accused. You roll over in the hay, itching from the straw and from the weight of memory. The goat shifts beside you. You whisper, "Don't cheat, friend." The goat stares blankly, probably wise. By dawn, the anger has cooled to frost. You re-enter the cottage. Your spouse hands you a cup of ale. Still no words, but the bread is fresher today. Lighter. No cracks. Forgiveness, it seems, is slow, but maybe not impossible. Still, you flinch when you bite down, just in case there's a pebble tucked inside. Just in case there's a storm coming. Not the kind that rattles shutters or floods pig pens, but one made of silk, secrets, and social disaster. You hear the gossip before it reaches your ears properly, like the hush of wind through barley. A nobleman has been caught straying, and not just with anyone, but with the maid. His wife is the countess. The maid is, well, not. And you happen to be delivering firewood to the manor when it all unfolds. Lucky you. You slip into the great hall just as a silver goblet goes clattering across the stone floor. The countess stands in full fury, eyes like sharpened glass, her sleeves trailing behind her like war banners. The nobleman, her husband, is caught mid-sentence, stammering something about misunderstandings and innocent embroidery lessons. The maid? Gone, vanished, probably halfway to another shire by now. You back out slowly like a rat from a flooded pantry. See, when peasants cheat, they get stocks, shame, or stinging caps. But when the nobility cheat, oh, it's much more dangerous and much more political. The nobleman isn't just a husband. He's a landholder, a commander, a symbol. His marriage wasn't for love. It was an alliance sealed with gold, livestock, and probably an awkward feast. And his infidelity isn't a private embarrassment. It's a breach of contract, of power. The countess doesn't scream. She doesn't sob. She writes a letter. That's worse.
Within days, a courier arrives from her father's castle, armor gleaming, horse snorting with purpose. The message is clear. Make this right or face consequences. You hear talk of annulment, of lands being reclaimed, of alliances falling apart. Historians still argue how often noble women successfully leveraged these scandals, but there's no denying that a well-placed wife could turn a husband's affair into a legal chess move. Sometimes it was just separation, other times exile. In one particularly juicy case from Burgundy, a nobleman was forced to sign away half his estates after being caught with his squire. That scandal involved 3 monasteries, a sheep cart, and a lute. Details are blurry, but the outcome, legendary. In the present mess, the nobleman is summoned to court. Royal court, not the one with nettles and donkeys, the one with scrolls, seals, and men in fur-trimmed robes, pretending not to smirk. He leaves in a hurry. The manor grows quiet. The countess begins ordering renovations, starting with her husband's study. The tapestries are replaced. The wine cellar is locked. She hosts a feast in his absence, all smiles and veiled threats. You attend. You don't speak much. You just watch her toast to loyalty and good breeding as her dog growls at the empty seat beside her. It's worth noting that cheating among the noble class wasn't exactly rare. It was more about who got caught. Lords kept mistresses. Ladies kept companions. Some were discreet, others not so much. In courts like Aquitaine or Milan, flirtation was practically sport. But cross the wrong boundary, sleep with a rival's daughter, or worse, embarrass the family, and suddenly it's not love, it's treason. You overhear a steward muttering that the maid was last seen headed toward the coast, possibly to a convent or a pirate ship. It's hard to tell. Later that week, you pass the manor and see the countess riding out, flanked by knights. She doesn't look back. It makes you wonder what would have happened if your affair had taken place up there in the silk and candlestick world of the noble class. Would you be in a gilded dungeon composing poetry while sipping vinegar, or quietly missing somewhere near a ravine? You shake the thought from your head. Cheating at your level brings nettles. Cheating at their level brings kingdoms to their knees. But in both cases, the consequences always find you. You think you've seen every kind of punishment by now? Public, private, spiritual, and slightly ridiculous. But then someone mentions the word absolution, and your ears perk up like a dog hearing the word bone. Turns out there's a way to clean the slate. Not erase the ink, but smudge it just enough to keep your soul out of hot water. And all it takes is money, or sheep, or land, or a very long walk. Welcome to the medieval spiritual marketplace, where salvation is available for a price. You find yourself at the local church again, this time on quieter terms. The priest greets you with a smile that looks oddly hopeful, as if you're about to buy a particularly expensive candle. He leads you to a back room where the walls are lined with dusty scrolls and a donation box carved with a saint who looks mildly guilty himself. So, he says, there are several options for penance. Option 1, a pilgrimage. Walk to a holy site, say a lot of prayers, sleep on dirt, and hope divine grace shines on your poor, blistered feet. Option 2, pay for a mass, or 10, maybe even 100, depending on how spicy your sin was. Option 3, donate something useful: a cow, a bolt of wool, a carved bench. One man famously donated his entire winter sausage stash. No one asked what he ate that season. You opt for a blend, a small donation of coins, just enough to make the priest nod, and a promise to attend the next 3 feast days sober. He blesses you with a swift sign of the cross and notes it in the church records: penitent, partially absolved, conditional on continued good behavior, which is basically the medieval version of being on probation. Now, here's where it gets murky. Historians still argue about how widespread or fair these absolutions were. Some see them as spiritual mercy, offering grace to those who genuinely sought it. Others argue they were little more than an early form of sin for cash transactions, paving the path toward Reformation fury a few centuries later. Still, for you, it's a chance to breathe, to feel like maybe not today, but someday you won't be seen only as the one who strayed. Of course, it's not quite that easy. The next morning, you find a note pinned to your door. It's not signed, but the handwriting is precise and the message short. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. You stare at it for a long time before folding it into your pocket, just in case you ever start feeling too clean. Later that week, the pilgrims pass through town on their way to Canterbury. You walk with them for a mile or two, listening to their stories. One's walking for a dead uncle, another for a sick child, a third just really loves the walking. They ask what you're walking for. You shrug. A mistake. They nod. One of them pats your shoulder. Good reason. You don't walk all the way to Canterbury. Just enough to feel the rhythm of the road, the dust on your calves, the ache in your back. Maybe that counts for something. Maybe that's part of it. On the way back, you stop by the roadside shrine. Someone's left a bunch of dried flowers and a crust of bread. You add a smooth stone, warm from your palm. That night you sleep a little better. The church might have absolved you. The records might say penitent, but the road to peace, that's still winding with a few nettles of its own. The problem with surviving a scandal is that you don't get to decide when it's over. That choice belongs to the village. And the village never forgets. It begins with a sash. You're on your way to the market, humming under your breath when someone stops you. It's old Bet, the herbalist. She squints at you through layers of shawls and thyme, then ties a length of faded red cloth around your upper arm. Custom, she says firmly. Seen it done in 3 towns. Marks you as wayward. You stare down at the cloth. It's scratchy and smells faintly of rosemary and regret. You try to laugh it off, but she isn't joking. From then on, you notice it everywhere. The looks, the whispered jokes, the neighbors who suddenly walk the long way around the field, the children who giggle behind fences and run when you turn your head. Your new nickname, Scarlet Sleeve, it's not an official punishment, not in any scroll or record, but it might be worse because it sticks and it spreads. Even when the priest announces that your penance is fulfilled, even after your mule ride, your boiling iron ordeal, your soul-cleansing prayer marathons, people still look at you with the corner of their eyes. And the gossip, oh, it's thriving.
You hear a baker say you had an affair with 3 sisters in one night. A shepherd claims he saw you whispering to a goose and now suspects sorcery. One woman insists you seduced her cousin using only a lute and a jar of mead.
None of it's true, except the mead. Maybe. You try to keep your head down, do your work, stack your firewood, smile politely. But even your goods at the market sell slower now. A man picks through your apples, then mutters, "Adulterer apples," and walks away. You want to shout to remind them that everyone sins, that theirs just didn't happen to involve church registries, mule parades, or symbolic nettle accessories. But what would be the point?
In medieval life, reputation was currency, especially in small towns. You could be poor and respected, or rich and detested. But once your name turned sour, it followed you like a bad smell. You didn't just lose honor, you lost opportunities. Historians still argue whether villages invented these scarlet-like customs themselves, or if they were passed around, whispered between parishes, picked up like folk cures and fire-starting tricks. Some areas had literal sashes. Others handed out tokens or made people wear their spouse's colors as shame. In rare cases, offenders were made to sing confessions in rhyme on feast days. Public poetry, the final blow.
One widow in your village, sharp as vinegar and twice as unrelenting, begins to wear a matching sash. Not because she's guilty, but because she's bored. "Fashion statement," she says sweetly. Now you're the punchline. Still, there are flickers of kindness. A young shepherd nods at you one morning, wordless but respectful. A child offers you a flower and doesn't snatch it back. Your spouse, who still says little, lets you eat the first slice of bread again. Small steps. But in a world where your name is now a story, small steps matter. One evening you stand by the well, listening to frogs sing somewhere in the reeds. A woman approaches. She doesn't meet your eyes, but her voice is calm. "They'll move on," she says. "Eventually." You nod, unsure if she's right, but it's enough. You keep the sash, not out of shame anymore, but because it's part of the journey, a strange, itchy souvenir from the messiest chapter of your life. And in a town like this, sometimes the only way forward is through the middle of the market square, wearing a red ribbon and a slightly improved posture. You're repairing the fence one morning, splinter by splinter like a metaphor wearing boots, when you hear raised voices down the lane. Not angry exactly, just charged. There's a crowd, a few of the Reeves men, and someone in the center wrapped in a coarse cloak. You recognize her. It's Marga, the washerwoman. She's barefoot, hair tangled. Her eyes dart from side to side, lips tight like she's holding in a scream, or worse, trying not to cry. The word trickles through the crowd like ale through a leaky keg. She cheated. Only this time it's not just gossip, it's formal and public. A case brought before the manor court. Her husband made the complaint, loudly, said she was wandering in the evenings, that she had a look in her eye. He saw her speaking to the Reeves cousin, and that was enough. You watch from a distance, heart sinking, because you know that Marga's punishment will be harsher than yours. And you're right, the steward doesn't bother with fines.
doesn't mention nettles or donkey rides. He declares that Marga is to be whipped 3 lashes for breach of marital duty and bringing unrest to the parish. Someone cheers. You feel sick. See, in the medieval world, cheating was never punished equally. For men, it was a breach of honor, a laughable misstep, maybe some shame, maybe a fee. But for women, it was betrayal, danger, and distrust of the womb, because medieval society didn't just value women's fidelity, it relied on it. Land, inheritance, bloodlines, all depended on knowing whose child was whose. A cheating wife didn't just upset her husband, she threatened the entire property structure. So while men faced the stocks, women faced violence. Sometimes it was a lashing like Marga's. Other times they were shaved bald, forced to parade in their underclothes, or locked in the town cage. In some rare and darker cases, women were even stoned, especially in highly religious or remote communities. Though such extremes were rare, they cast long shadows. Historians still argue how common corporal punishment for female infidelity truly was. Records were often filtered through church scribes or male magistrates. But the imbalance? It was baked into the bones of the system. Marga doesn't cry. Not when the lashes fall. Not when the crowd watches. Not even when her husband spits near her feet. She just straightens her spine, lifts her chin, and walks away with a limp and a silence sharper than any whip. You catch her eye for the briefest moment. She sees you. You lower your head, because what can you say? You, who got a donkey and a song, and she got blood and a bruise. That night you sit outside your hut staring at the stars. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, an owl hoots. The world continues, but your thoughts stay on Marga. The next day you leave a bundle of dried herbs by her door for healing. You don't sign it. She knows. A few days later you see her in the market. No sash, no head covering, just a bold stare and a basket of clean linen. And you realize something. She survived. And maybe, just maybe, so will you. It starts with whispers, then a smell. Someone says, the apothecary's assistant has been brewing something strange at night. Others say they saw a red ribbon buried at the crossroads. And late one evening, you find a pouch of herbs hanging on your door handle, dried rosemary, lavender, and something bitter and unfamiliar. Attached is a note. One word smudged in charcoal. Protection. You stare at it, then glance around. No one in sight. Just the wind rattling shutters and a chicken who clearly knows more than she's saying. You've stumbled into the world of love potions and lusty curses, where medieval hearts and jealous minds mix superstition with stew pots. The next day you visit the apothecary to ask if this was his doing. He laughs too quickly. Not mine, he says, adjusting his mortar and pestle like it's an alibi. Could be anyone. Could be Marta. Marta, the shepherdess with the gap-toothed smile and 17 cats? Yes, her. Turns out Marta has been crafting remedies for heartache for years. Some call it folk medicine. Others call it witchcraft. Depends on how well the potion works. Or how mad someone's wife becomes. In medieval villages, Cheating often invited not only wrath but magic. Folk beliefs were strong, especially when reason failed. If someone suddenly turned cold, surely they'd been cursed. If a man strayed, maybe someone had slipped him a binding draught. These potions ranged from sweet herbal infusions to, let's say, less sanitary ingredients. Some recipes included pigeon droppings, powdered bone, and even menstrual blood. We'll skip those for now. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were truly believed to work, or if they were more about hope, an effort to grasp control in a world ruled by hunger, disease, and unpredictable lovers. Still, the fear of magic had real consequences. Women accused of brewing love spells could be branded as witches. Even having too many cats or herbs drying on the wall could land you in trouble. People whispered, they watched, they remembered. You start seeing signs everywhere. A sprig of basil on the doorstep, maybe a charm. A neighbor mumbling near her garden, might be a prayer or a spell. Your spouse humming softly while stirring soup. Better not ask. You visit Marta. She offers you a drink, something warm and fragrant. You hesitate. Not a love potion, she says, just cider. You take a sip, it's good, probably safe. Probably. She tells you stories of women who turned away heartbreak with rue and sage, of men who tried to brew forgiveness with elderflower. One tale, whispered low, claims a knight once fell madly in love with a hedgehog after drinking the wrong tea. You raise your eyebrows. She shrugs. At least hedgehogs don't gossip. You leave with a satchel of calming herbs and a promise not to mention her name if things go sour again. Later you place the protection bundle above your bed, just in case. Whether it's magic or not doesn't matter. It smells nice, and somehow it makes you sleep a little deeper. The Middle Ages may not have had dating apps or counseling, but they had intentions. Wrapped in twine, steeped in clay pots, hidden under pillows. Whether they were cures or curses, that's still up for debate. All you know is this. In a world full of suspicion and sin, sometimes a little rosemary above the door is all that stands between you and another scandal. You return home one afternoon to find a messenger waiting by your door. Not the wide-eyed village boy or the gossip-mongering neighbor, but someone official. Robes, seal, a little pouch of dust clinging to his shoes from a long ride. He hands you a scroll, unfurls it, reads it aloud like he's announcing a royal feast. You are hereby summoned to appear before the cathedral court to respond to charges under canon law concerning breach of matrimonial vows and offense to Christian order. You blink. But I already... Canon law, he interrupts with a tired sigh, is separate from local custom. This is church business. Welcome to the big leagues. See, in the Middle Ages, the church didn't just forgive sin, it governed it. Canon law was the legal code of the church, and it took marriage very seriously. Unlike today's mixed systems, marriage back then was a sacrament and a contract, and breaking it could trigger legal action in an entirely different court system. You travel for half a day to reach the cathedral town. Boots muddy, nerves frayed. The cathedral looms ahead like a stone sermon. Its gargoyles watch you enter with mouths frozen mid-scream, and for a moment you wonder if one of them looks oddly familiar. It does. Like Marta's favorite goat. Inside, you're directed to a chamber that smells like candle wax and cold judgment. A bishop presides, flanked by clerks scribbling with unnerving enthusiasm. They wear expressions like baked bread, crusty on the outside, unreadable within. The case is read aloud. Adultery, breach of vow, scandalous behavior within a parish.
You consider saying something clever, but instead you bow slightly and try to keep your hands from shaking.
Your spouse has submitted a statement too. It's read aloud. It's kinder than you expected, but factual, precise, painfully so. Then come the questions.
Did you enter the marriage freely? Yes. Did you vow fidelity under God's witness? Yes.
Do you deny the acts for which you have already received village judgment?
You glance at the bishop. He doesn't blink.
No, I don't deny them.
The clerks keep writing.
Canon law didn't allow for divorce, not as we know it. But there were loopholes. Marriages could be annulled under certain conditions. Consanguinity being too closely related, coercion or fraud. But cheating? Not a loophole, not a ticket out, just another weight on the soul. Historians still argue whether these courts were more about spiritual discipline or social control. Some say they offered a measure of fairness to wronged parties. Others believe they functioned to preserve church authority, keeping sins in check and people properly frightened. Your case, however, doesn't call for annulment. It's a hearing of moral reinforcement. The bishop reminds you, gently but firmly, that your soul hangs in the balance, that your penance is ongoing, that if you stray again, the consequences will be harsher. He issues his sentence. You are to attend confession weekly, donate a modest tithe to the poor, and most creatively, spend 1 hour a week assisting the town's lepers. To cultivate humility, he adds. You nod. You don't argue. The clerks scratch down every word. As you leave, one of them hands you a copy of the ruling on a neat square of parchment sealed with a waxy red cross, a spiritual scarlet letter. You tuck it away and walk out beneath the stone saints. They don't move, they don't smile, but you imagine, just for a moment, one of them might have winked.
Probably just sun in your eyes.
Back in your village, word spreads fast. Again, someone carves a small cross into your fence post, not out of malice, but as a quiet reminder or a warning, or maybe both.
You stare at it for a while, then pick up your chisel and carve a second one beside it. You're not hiding anymore.
Time has a way of softening things. Wounds, tempers, bread crusts, but not memory. Not in this village.
It's been months since the stocks, weeks since the mule ride, the bishop's ruling, and that unfortunate nettle hat. You've paid fines, said prayers, walked barefoot to shrines, and even helped a leper pick wild garlic. You've done everything you were told, more even.
And yet, you feel it in the way people pause mid-sentence when you enter, the way no one sits next to you on feast days, unless the benches are full, the way the tanner nods politely, but never actually meets your eye. You are no longer the cheater, but you are also no longer just a neighbor. You're a story, and like all good stories, people tell yours with flourishes, with details that stretch and curl like smoke. One day, you overhear a young man whisper that you seduced 5 women during a thunderstorm. Another insists you were cursed by a wandering bard. Someone else swears they saw your donkey speak Latin. You're impressed and also very tired. This is the quiet, final stage of medieval justice. Not law, not church, not punishment, but reputation. And once your reputation shifts, it stays shifted. You try not to let it get to you. After all, you're still standing. You're still working. You're still making bread. Not bitter anymore, thank heavens. But sometimes, late at night, when the fire dies low, you remember how simple things used to feel. Before every nod carried weight, before every silence felt like a sentence. One morning you see a stranger in the village, a new shepherd, young, awkward, hopeful. He greets you warmly, asks for directions to the river, and doesn't seem to know your story. Not yet. And in that moment, you see a version of yourself before all this, before the shame and shadow, before the red sash and the donkey. You point him toward the river, offer a word of advice about wolves near the bend. He thanks you and walks away, cheerful and unburdened. You stand there for a long moment wondering, can you ever really leave a past like this behind? Some say no. Once marked, always marked. Villages are tight, tongues are long. But others? Well, others believe that memory fades in little ways, that new people bring new stories, that time writes over the old ones with quieter ink. Historians still argue whether medieval people ever truly rehabilitated their social standing after scandal. Some records show outcasts welcomed back. Others show families relocating entirely to start over in another parish. Reputation wasn't legally binding, but it might as well have been. You begin to carve more crosses on your fence, not as apologies, but as reminders, one for each act of kindness, each effort to make things right. Each week you kept your head up when people looked down. At some point the glances soften. Not all of them, not always, but enough. One day, a child asks you for help mending a fishing net. You do. They smile. They say thank you. And you realize they weren't even born when you made your mistake. To them, you're just the person who knows knots. It's not everything, but it's something, and sometimes something is all you need to start again. The seasons turn, leaves fall, fields sleep, and your village shifts subtly like a sleeping dog, changing position, never waking but never still. Your scandal is no longer the freshest meat on the gossip spit. A new one brews down the lane. Someone's geese have been mysteriously multiplying, and the midwife's been spotted leaving the blacksmith's hut at odd hours. You sip your ale at the tavern, and for once, no one's looking at you. It's not redemption, not quite, but it's a return to the ordinary. You tend your fields, help that new shepherd with his fence, share bread at market without side-eye glances. The villagers who once muttered now nod. The priest asks how your back is. Even your spouse sits beside you during Mass again, their hand resting light, brief, on your knee. You still carry the memories, of course. The donkey, the stocks, the scratchy red sash. They're part of your story now, whether you like it or not. But they've stopped being only shame. They're just the path you walked. One morning you wake to the sound of church bells ringing longer than usual. A messenger rides in by noon, dusty and breathless. A decree is read in the square. An edict from the bishop about moral reform. A new expectation. All past public penance is to be reviewed and possibly pardoned. You half listen, pretending not to care. But your heart skips. Later that week, the priest invites you to the chapel, a quiet meeting. He reads a note from the cathedral, glances up, and simply says,
They've marked your case as completed. You're clear.
There's no trumpet, no choir of angels, no scroll with golden trim.
Just you. A nod and a new page in the ledger.
You walk home under a warm sun. A few petals from the early blooms drift on the breeze, catching in your hair like confetti from a very quiet parade. That night, as you sit by the fire, your spouse beside you, you notice the little protection charm still hangs above the door. Faded, frayed, but still holding. You leave it there because in this quiet moment, you feel what you've been chasing for so long.
Not forgiveness, peace.
And now, listener, it's time to sleep. Let's slow things down. Soften the air around your thoughts and let your mind rest like a stone on still water. Imagine the flicker of firelight across the timber beams, the gentle rhythm of crickets beyond the shutters, and the fading clatter of gossip turning into nothing more than a breeze through the wheat. You've walked a long road tonight. Faced the stalks, the courts, the glances, the gossip, and the guilt. But you kept walking, kept breathing, kept showing up. And here you are now, whole and weary and human. So loosen your shoulders.